Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Oh, my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. I love you, God. May my words today be inspired by that love. May my words be your words as I speak what is in my heart. Guide me. Let it be for the good of all those listening. May it lift us and inspire us and help us to heal and reveal more of your light. Amen. I know we don't usually start the service, the message that way, but I felt just strangely guided to do so this week. I love God. I shared a few weeks ago about an experience I had when I was 9 years old at the little Pentecostal church I grew up in, a mystical, numinous experience of feeling eternal, unconditional love that was really, there was no explanation. It just was. I just had this embodied experience of love, and it sustained me in the dark times of my life, knowing that I am loved like that. But I didn't talk about how it changed the way I am in relationship with God. Through my teenage years and my young adult years before my faith kind of deconstructed in the traditional Christian religion, I had this heart for worship, and I would lead worship, and I would sing that song and others, and just open my heart and just tell God how much I loved Him. And this week, as I'm talking about practicing the presence, and all week long that song has just been running through my mind and my heart. How pure just to sing, I love you, God. I love you, Lord. There are many times that I'm speaking to you from 20 plus years of training in New Thought principle and practice. There are many times I'm speaking to you from the depths and the center of our teaching, from the Fillmores and from Emily Cady and Ernest Holmes and Joel Goldsmith and others. I'm teaching you something that has been tried and true, and we agree this is who we are. That's not what I'm doing today. I'm teaching you today, actually, I'm exploring my own questions today. But I believe that there is spiritual food for you if you're willing to open your heart and listen to what I'm sharing. When I was a child, I grew up with a male father figure God, and that was good. That's God was male. When the first time I heard somebody say Mother God, I was like, that is not right. That was my response. I was like, nope, God's a guy. And so when I came after I had left religion behind for many years and then in my late 20s came back into this tradition, I didn't quite know what to think of this Mother, Father, God business. And so I was taught our principles, that God is infinite presence, infinite intelligence, infinite love, infinite creativity, and this Father figure of a God that's taught in the Judeo-Christian tradition is true, but it's only partial. It's just part of God. And I learned that anything that we say God is, and then fill in the blank, it's part of the truth. And I learned that, like a broken clock, it's right twice a day. Even people who have beliefs that to us may be oppressive or limiting, they've got part of the truth. Part of what they're saying is right. So I began this journey of deconstructing and unraveling and expanding my awareness of God. And I was in a New Thought church in Dallas, Texas, and I was taught that this separate Father God that I had been singing to and praying to all those years was not the God that we talk about in New Thought. Instead, we talk about the indwelling presence of the Christ mind. We talk about the infinite presence. God is everywhere. The divine intelligence is everywhere and available to us. That God is principle. God is not a person. God is a principle. And I began to deepen and grow, and I healed so many of my beliefs, and I became a demonstration, truly, of the power of New Thought teaching, that my life was a wreck when I got here. And now you let me get on this stage and put on a suit and talk to you. So, hey, this stuff works. But I missed singing love songs to God. As I said, I'm exploring a question here today, and I want us to explore it together as a community of faith. A friend of mine, I was doing some spiritual counseling with him one day, and he came from a very structured, conservative religious teaching, and when his mom found out he was going to Unity, she got a little worried. And so she asked him about it, and they were having a conversation. And he finally said, look, Mom, I would rather have questions that I can't answer than answers that I can't question. I would rather have questions that I can't answer than answers that I can't question. So if you're looking for certainty, there are plenty of churches in this city that will give you that, that will tell you exactly what to believe and exactly what it all means and exactly where it's all going. We're not that in Unity. We teach principle and we teach practice. So we try these things out in our own lives and we determine if it's true for us. And I'm in this question around singing love songs to God. Because while gaining this knowledge that the indwelling presence of God is my nature and understanding that God is everywhere and there are not two powers but one power, that has been incredibly healing and transformational, it has not touched the part of my heart that just wants to love God, just wants to worship. And about 15 years ago, I came across a teaching from the Integral Movement, Ken Wilber, that began to give me hope. It's called The Three Faces of God. Reverend Karen and I led a workshop on it in June. You can Google it. It's fabulous. But basically it's this. The infinite is infinite. You can't hold all of it. But there are, of all of the spiritual traditions and religions and faith practices in the world, it comes down to there are three different ways of being with the divine. And you can think of them like the parts of speech. The first person, the second person, and the third person. And the first person is the I, that I am part of God. I would never say that I am God. I would say that all that I am is God, but I'm not all that God is. You get the distinction? And then we skip to the third, which is the it, the impersonal, impartial presence principle law that New Thought is really built upon that teaching of that aspect of the divine. The Eastern traditions really emphasize these two, that all is one. It's this idea that in Hinduism it's expressed as all is Brahma. Brahma is the one presence that expresses as, how many thousands of deities. They're all meant to capture a part of the infinite presence, but it's all one. The same in Buddhism. In the Western traditions, in Islam and Christianity and Judaism, there tends to be a dualistic understanding in that we're here and God is there. And they're relational, and that's the second face of God, the thou presence. And what Wilber teaches around this is that to be a truly integral spiritual being, you must be able to stand in all three. And in unity, I believe sometimes that we have tossed the baby out with the bathwater. That we have released that separate outside God that was rule-following, rule-making, and judging. We've let that part go, so we don't have that relational overseer presence anymore, and we've embraced the indwelling Christ mind. We've embraced the God presence in everyone and everything, but we've lost something, at least some of us have, to be able to just sing simply, I love you, Lord. So I am exploring this question of how can we, in new thought, be absolutely in integrity with our teaching that God is everything and everywhere and God is indwelling in me, and yet I can be in relationship with a loving Creator. Now, every personification, every image of God I have, that's actually the true metaphysical meaning of the Ten Commandments, was that you shall have no graven images. That's what it's about. Because how can you get around the edges of the infinite? How can you define that this is what the infinite looks like? You can't do it. And so every time that we're singing a song to God, we must remember this is just part of the truth, but my heart needs to. There's a song by a Christian singer, Nicole Nordeman, and she says, "Oh, great God, be small enough to hear me now." Sometimes I just need a little bit of God that I can bring my heart to, declare my love for. I will tell you that in all of my years, I was never limited by loving God, I was sometimes limited by the judgment and the rules and all that, but when I just poured out my heart to God, I was never in any way diminished or limited or belittled. I was always expanded and uplifted. So, I'm doing my best to be honest, to be in principle, and sometimes I don't always get it right. Little Johnny was watching his father, the minister, work, and I don't know why it's always little Johnny in these jokes. I haven't met a child named Johnny in 40 years. I think today, by law, they're all required to be named Noah. But little Johnny was watching his father prepare his sermon. And he said, "Daddy, how do you know what to tell the people?" And then the minister looked at his son and says, "God tells me." And he said, "Oh, well then why do you have all those places where you crossed it out and rewrote it?" So I do believe this message is on my heart for us today from God, but it's coming through me. It's coming through my experience and my filters and my heart. But just know that I'd give this for the hope that we can all evolve and heal and grow together. I'm speaking today about the practice of the presence. There are two books that I was really drawn to. One is by Joel Goldsmith. It's a metaphysical classic. It was one of the first books I read in New Thought. It's called Practicing the Presence. And in this book, in the first chapter, Goldsmith references an earlier work from the 16th century called The Practice of the Presence by Brother Lawrence. Does anybody remember that one? Brother Lawrence. Brother Lawrence was a 16th century monk. He was born to a poor family. He was trying to find some way to make it in the world, and so he decided he'd join the army. It was a way they would give him food and a little bit of spending money, and he could serve the French army. So he did that. And in that process, he had an awakening experience. He had a spiritual transformational moment where he came face to face with the transcendent reality in the mundane reality. Looking at a fruit tree It doesn't say which fruit it was. Maybe a pear. Let's go with that. He was looking at a pear tree in the middle of winter, and its branches were bare. And to all appearances, this tree was dead and barren. But, he'd seen a few springs, and he knew that this was just the season. But in looking at this barren fruit tree, he had an awakening moment. That just as he was gazing upon the barren tree, seeing that it would come into bud and flower and leaf and fruit in the right moment, so God was witnessing him, barren and dry, but knowing that a flowering and a fruiting was coming in his own heart and his own life. And in that moment, he fell in love with God. While he was in the army, he had an injury to his leg and he could no longer serve, and he was looking for another way to make it in the world. And in Paris, he joined a Carmelite monastery. And in those days, there were monks and priests who were trained and who went to seminary, and they were at one level. And then they called them lay monks. They were just people. They were really just the servants of the monastery. And that's how he came in. Not to become a priest, not to become a teacher, not to become a wise spiritual being, but just to serve. And they put him to work in the kitchen. But Brother Lawrence's practice was to see God everywhere, to be in the presence of God everywhere and in every act. And while he was washing the dishes, he was singing love songs to God and worshiping the divine, loving this moment into a greater reality. And people noticed his joy and his peace, and the other monks, they came to him for advice and for counsel, and he talked to them of his practice of just loving God and practicing God's presence everywhere and everything he did. And eventually the bishop heard about it and sent an envoy and said, go interview Brother Lawrence and see what this is all about. And at first, Brother Lawrence was like, why would you want to talk to me? I'm the dishwasher. But he finally recognized that this was not for any political aim, so he agreed to 4 interviews. And for 4 days, the bishop's envoy just talked to Brother Lawrence and recorded their conversation. And then along with about 16 letters that Brother Lawrence had written to other people, that became this book, The Practice of the Present. This is what Brother Lawrence said in his own words. I don't speak French, so I will do the English translation. Men invent means and methods of coming at God's love. They learn rules and set up devices to remind them of that love. And it seems like a world of trouble to bring oneself into the consciousness of God's presence. Yet it might be so simple. Is it not quicker and easier just to do our common business wholly for the love of God? He writes that Karen was reminding me that I don't have the quote in front of me, but amidst the clatter and clank of the pots, he found in the presence of God. And how many of us in life's distracting moments, we're not there, He says that he would just pick up a piece of straw from the kitchen floor and in that moment be in relationship, in communion with God. Don't make it difficult. The question I'm in is, how do we find ways to love God? Because I think without it, we're missing an important aspect of our spiritual life. I think we can be very pragmatic and applied, but it's a dry place. And I think we need that heart-opening experience of not only knowing that we're loved by the universe, by spirit, by whatever name you choose, by divine infinite intelligence, but that we can also reciprocate and be a part of this beautiful experience. Our Unity women are doing a whole year of life as a spiritual practice. I think they're playing Monopoly on Saturday as a spiritual practice. Is that correct? They had a tea party last month. They sewed those beautiful dresses for the girls in Kenya, each stitch loving God. That's where we're headed. Gary Norian, would you come here? People think when I bring Gary out that I'm going to sing, but I'm not. I've actually just... Gary is Exhibit A. Would you just play something that you love for a moment? Before you applaud, let's just sit in this moment. Thank you. Any one of you could come to this piano, place your hands upon the keys, and sound would come out. Any of you could do that. How many of you could do what he just did? I've been playing piano since I was 10 years old. I can't do what Gary has done. So how many hours a day did you practice when you were learning to play piano? 6 hours a day. For at least a year and a half. No. How many years did you have that kind of practice in your life? How many years would you estimate? 12, 13 years dedicated, 6 hours a day, every day. I'm guessing that when you were learning a new piece, and if it was challenging, you sometimes hit some wrong notes.
Yes, on the wall.
On the wall. I'm going to tell a story. I didn't ask your permission. I hope you'll forgive me. One time that he was frustrated, and his mom heard him like struggling with a piece, and she gave him permission to say a swear word. and she thought he would choose one of the PG-13 ones, and he didn't. But what could she do? She'd given him permission. What I want to offer to you is that you have just demonstrated someone who has devoted themselves to the practice of the presence. You see, what we're really talking about with the second face of God relationship is devotion. Unity has often been slammed as saying we don't have a devotional path because we don't have this worship that I keep talking about that maybe we should reincorporate in some healthy, evolved way. And yet, this is devotion too. To give oneself with love to the practice of their gift. And struggling and frustrated. You know, this week I knew I was giving this talk, so I thought, well, I'm going to practice the presence this week, show them how easy it is. I found myself frustrated. I found myself disappointed. I found myself sad. I found myself angry so many times. And it's like, I'm supposed to be practicing the presence. I'm supposed to be loving God in this moment too. And yet I'm pulled from my awareness of God's presence by life's happenings. The Astros lost on Thursday night, and I was there. That was hard to practice the presence of God. They just couldn't get the bats going. And when I think about that, that's so petty compared to what some of you are walking through in your lives. There are people here who are dealing with terminal illness of themselves or of their partner. How do you practice the present when you're walking someone to the end of their life? There are people who in this church right now who have lost everything financially, and they don't know how they're going to live or where they're going to live. How do you practice the presence then? What I'm sure of in this moment is that God is extending an invitation to you and to me to feel love, to feel the transformational possibility of God's love, no matter what we're walking through. And we have a choice to accept that invitation and to practice the presence, albeit imperfectly, not getting it right all the time, even most of the time. Or we can choose to believe life's circumstances, to believe in our limitation, to believe that it's hopeless. We can give in to despair, or we can love God. Brother Lawrence struggled. The writer of The Practice of the Present says, he admitted that the path to perfect union was not easy. He spent years disciplining his heart and mind to yield to God's presence. As often as I could, I placed myself as a worshiper before him, fixing my mind upon his holy presence, recalling it when I found it had wandered. And this proved to be an exercise frequently painful, and yet I persisted through all my difficulties. And yet I persisted through all my difficulties. Joel Goldsmith says, anyone with a sufficient desire for a realization of God can achieve that realization. The grace of God will guarantee it. Is your desire sufficient? Do you want to practice the presence of God? Do you want a higher plane of reality available in your life to transform this difficult situation into glory? Do you want it? And if you do, the invitation is there. I love the word realization. Karen and I were talking about that between the services. The realization of God's presence is to get it from an idea in the head into an embodied awareness, like I know that I know that I know. It's in me. Goldsmith says it's like we're sitting in a darkened room talking about sunlight, and we can talk about the qualities of sunlight and the benefits of sunlight. We can talk about how much it changes the atmosphere, but until we raise the shades, we're in darkness. I don't know what your path to loving God is. It might be sitting at a piano for 6 hours a day for 12 years. It might be changing that dirty diaper with love. It might be singing a song to the infinite. There is no right name for God. I just want to say that. I call it God because it's the biggest word I know. Goldsmith calls it the infinite invisible. But what I want you to know is that it loves you. And it has brought you forth for a holy purpose. And it is asking you to bring your love to your life and practice this awareness that wherever you are, God is in you, as you, for you. I love you. God bless you.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.